I have buried better men than me and outlived two horses I'd have traded my own bones for. And in all those years, the funniest, finest thing I ever watched a man do was stand on the Lantern Bend platform at midnight in a collar 2 sizes too tight, holding a fistful of late asters he'd cut himself, waiting for a wife he had never laid eyes on. That was Reuben Cobb. I had known him since he was a boy small enough to ride in my coat, and I can tell you he was braver facing a wall-eyed bull than he was that night facing the dark down the tracks, listening for the whistle. "You sure about this, Reuben?" I said, mostly to be cruel, because that is what old men do to the young ones they love. "No," he said. "I am not sure of one thing in this world, Amos, except that the house is too quiet." I let that be. A man does not write off to a matrimonial agency in Kansas City because his life is full. He does it because the supper table has one plate on it, and the second chair has been empty so long the cat sleeps in it. Reuben had buried his mother the spring he was 19, and his father the winter he was 26, and he had run the quarter moon alone ever since with no company but me and a half-dozen hands who scattered every fall. He was 33 that year. He had 800 head and 400 acres of the best grass on the Cottonwood Flats, and a house his father built of squared logs in good intention, and he had nobody to light a lamp for. So he had written a letter. I know what was in it because he made me read it before he sent it, the way a man will make you taste a thing he is afraid is spoiled. It said more or less that he was a rancher of sound habits and no debts, that he could not abide laziness or fine airs, and that he was seeking a plain, hard-working woman, sensible and sturdy, who did not require pretty words or pretty things, who could keep a house and a kitchen garden and not pine for town. Plain, sturdy, sensible. He used those 3 words like a man laying fence posts, and he was proud of them. He thought he had described exactly what he needed. He had described, I would learn, exactly nothing that was about to step down off that train. The whistle came first, long and low, the way it always does, bending out over the flats. Then the light, swinging through the dark like a lantern carried by a giant. Reuben's hand tightened on the asters until I heard a stem snap. "Stand easy," I told him. "She is more scared than you are." He looked at me like I had said something in Greek. It had not occurred to him, I think, that a woman who has sold off everything she owns and ridden 1,000 miles to marry a stranger might be carrying a little fear of her own. That was Reuben all over. A kind man, but a man who had spent so long being lonely, he had forgot other people were anything but scenery. The train came in hissing and groaning and stinking of coal and stopped, and for a long minute nobody got down. The conductor swung out with his lamp and looked at us, the 2 of us, an old man and a young one in a collar too tight, and he hollered back into the car, "This is your stop, ma'am, if you're getting down." And she got down. I will tell you what I saw, because I saw it plainer than Reuben did, on account of I was not the one she had come to marry, and a man's eyes go strange when he is looking at his own future. I saw a woman of maybe 30 in a traveling dress that had been good once and had been brushed and mended a dozen times since, the way a thing is kept up by somebody who used to have nice things and means to keep her chin level about no longer having them. I saw a straight back. I saw a small chin set at an angle a man learns to be wary of. I saw gray eyes that went over the platform, over the depot, over the dark beyond it, and then over Reuben Cobb head to foot in about the time it takes to read a price tag and decide it is too high. She set down a carpet bag and a small trunk and a hat box tied with string, all of it old, all of it kept. She looked at the flowers in his fist. She looked at his face. "Mr. Cobb," she said. It was not a question. She had got his look off the one tintype he'd sent, which he had paid $2 for in Cheyenne and which made him look, he'd complained, like a startled owl. It did, too. "Ma'am," Reuben said. He thrust the asters at her so hard he near put one up her nose. "These are, I cut them. There's more by the creek but they don't keep so." She took them. She held them the way you hold a thing somebody has handed you that you have not decided about. "They're lovely," she said, in a voice that meant they were not the point. I am Henrietta Boone. The agency will have told you that. Etta, Reuben said. The letter said you go by Etta. The letter said a great many things. She looked at the asters again. Something moved across her face quick and was gone, and I have thought since that it might have been the first soft thing she let him see, and that he missed it entirely. Mr. Cobb, before we go a step further, I think we should be honest with one another, as we are about to be a great deal more than acquainted. You wrote that you wanted a plain, sturdy, sensible woman who could keep a house and not pine for town. I did, Reuben said, and he said it like a man who is glad something has gone according to plan. I am sensible, Etta Boone said. I will grant you sensible, but I have been called many things in my life, Mr. Cobb, and plain and sturdy were never two of them, and I am not going to begin a marriage by pretending to be a heifer you have bought sound. I keep a house beautifully. I have never in my life kept a kitchen garden, milked a cow, plucked a chicken, or churned butter, and I will not insult you by swearing I can, because you would find me out by Thursday. There was a silence on that platform you could have driven a wagon through. I want to tell you Reuben rose to it. I want to tell you he laughed, or took her hand, or said some gallant thing. What he did was stand there with his ears going the color of a brand and say, "Oh." "Oh," she agreed. The agency," Reuben said. They were to send. They were to send what you asked for," Etta said, "and instead they sent what was willing to come. I expect we are both a little disappointed. I will tell you plainly that the letter the agency showed me of yours made you sound like a prosperous gentleman of refined sensibility, and I see now that they take liberties in both directions. You are not a gentleman of refined sensibility, Mr. Cobb. You are a man who has cut a fistful of weeds and put on a collar that is strangling you, and stood out here at midnight in the cold to meet a stranger, and you look at this moment as if you would rather be anywhere on God's earth. So, we are even. The question is what we mean to do about it. I have been around a long time, and I have heard a lot of men and women speak to each other, and I had never in my life heard anything quite like that. I looked at Reuben to see had it killed him. It had not. Something had come up in his face under the embarrassment that I had not seen there in years. He was looking at her now, really looking, the way you look at a horse that has just done something you did not know it could do, and there was the beginning of something that was either temper or admiration, and with Reuben those two things lived next door and shared a fence. "What I mean to do about it," he said, slow, "is carry your trunk to the wagon, because it is past midnight and it is cold and you have come a long way, and you can decide in the morning whether you have made a mistake, and so can I. The agency took my fee and I expect they took something off you too, and neither one of us is going to get it back by standing here. There is a room in my house that was my mother's. It has a door that locks from the inside and I will not trouble it. Come daylight, if you want to go back, I will drive you to this platform myself and put you on the eastbound and not say a word against you, and pay your fare besides. That is the most honest offer I know how to make to a person I have known 11 minutes. She studied him. The asters had got crushed a little against her front, and she did not seem to notice. That, Etta Boone said at last, is more sensible than anything in your letter. Carry the trunk, Mr. Cobb. So he carried the trunk. I drove, and the three of us went out into the dark toward the quarter moon, the woman on the seat beside Reuben sitting straight as a fence post with a fistful of dying flowers in her lap, and the two of them not saying one word the whole way, and me up front pretending to mind the team and grinning like a fool at the road, because I had wanted that house to have a second voice in it for 7 years, and whatever else this was going to be, it was going to be loud. When we got in, Reuben lit the lamp and showed her the room that had been his mother's, and stood in the doorway too big for it, turning his hat in his hands. She looked at the bed and the washstand and the little window, and you could see her measuring it against rooms she had had once. Then she set her carpetbag down and said, "Thank you, it's clean." "My mother kept it nice," Reuben said. "I never could see to let it go to ruin." Etta looked at him a moment longer than she needed to. "Good night, Mr. Cobb," she said. And Reuben, God help him, said the first of about 10,000 of them. He stood in the doorway with his hat going around in his hands, and he ducked his head, and he said, "Good night, ma'am," like a boy at a schoolhouse, and pulled the door to so gentle you'd have thought it was made of eggshell, and then he stood in the dark hall a minute with his hand still on the latch before he came away. I know because I was watching from the kitchen, where I had no business being, drinking his coffee. "Well," I said. "Don't," said Reuben. "I never said a word. You're saying about 40 of them with your face." He sat down across from me and put his head in his hands and laughed, a short, helpless, astonished laugh. "Plain and sturdy," he said into his fingers. "Amos, I asked for plain and sturdy." "You did." He lifted his head. He was not laughing now exactly, but it was still back behind his eyes. "Did you see her face out there," he said, "when she told me, daring me to send her packing, like she'd done it before, like she expected it?" He shook his head slow. "I have never in my life met a person so braced to be turned away." "And you didn't turn her away?" "No," Reuben said. He looked toward the dark hall, toward the locked door, the way a man looks at weather coming. "No, I did not." And then, quieter to himself more than to me, "I don't believe I could have." That was the first night. There were better ones coming and worse, but that is the one I think on most, the midnight platform and the crushed asters and the woman who would not pretend to be a heifer bought sound. Because everything that came after, all of it, was already there in that first half hour if a man had the eyes to see it. He didn't yet, but he was getting them. Morning came, as it does, and nobody got on the eastbound. I will say this for both of them. They were too proud to be the first to call it quits, and that pride, which near wrecked them a dozen times over the next months, was also the thing that saved them at the start. Reuben came down before light, the way he always did, and found her already up. She had not slept much, I think. She was standing in the kitchen in a dress better than the work wanted, looking at the cook stove like it was an animal that might bite, and when he came in she turned around with her chin up and said, "I told you I cannot cook on one of these. I did not say I would not learn. Show me, and do not be impatient, because impatience teaches nothing." So that is how it started. Not with love. With a cooking lesson, the rancher showing the widow how to bank a fire and judge the oven with the back of her hand. The two of them stiff as new boots, her getting it wrong and getting cross at herself for getting it wrong. Him biting back every easy word because she'd warned him off impatience, and he'd be hanged before he'd prove her right about him. The biscuits that first morning were a crime against flour. We ate them anyway, all three of us, and nobody said a word, and that silence had more respect in it than a year of compliments. She was, I want to be plain about this, no helpless thing. I have heard the way folks tell these stories, the poor lost lady saved by the strong rough man, and that is not the truth of Etta Boone, and I will not let it be told that way over my account. She had been a merchant's wife in Ohio, married young to a man named Boone who had a head for goods and no head at all for money, and she had spent 11 years keeping his books straight behind his back and his creditors gentled at the front door. And when the cholera took him, one bad August it took the business with it, and she had stood in the wreck of her own front parlor, while men she'd had to tea carried out her piano and her mother's china against the debts. She had no children. She had no people left living that would have her without making her smaller to take her in. And she had looked at the whole narrow future. A woman in her place was allowed. A back bedroom in a cousin's house. A lifetime of being grateful and useful and quietly disappeared. And she had decided, with that level chin, that she would rather gamble herself on a stranger in a country she'd never seen than spend 20 years being somebody's burden. That is not weakness. That is the nerviest thing I ever heard of a person doing. She had bet everything she had left, which was mostly her own backbone, on the chance that a far-off rancher might be a decent man. And she had got off the train braced to find she'd bet wrong, and gone ahead and bet anyway. When I understood that about her, it took me a few weeks. I stopped finding her sharpness funny and started finding it about the bravest thing on the quarter moon. But Lord, was it sharp those first weeks. She and Reuben fought like two cats in a sack, except that they fought polite, which is worse. He'd say a thing was done a certain way because it had always been done a certain way, and she'd ask, sweet as pie, whether always had ever once been examined or only inherited, and he'd go red and stomp out to the barn, and I'd find him in there an hour later reorganizing tack that did not need reorganizing, muttering. She'd rearrange the kitchen so a body could actually work in it, and he'd come in and not be able to find the coffee, and instead of saying it bothered him, he'd just stand there looking betrayed until she said, "It is in the second jar, Mr. Cobb, where a sane person would keep it," and he'd go red again. They could not get through a supper without one of them landing a small blow and the other one taking it standing. And every single night, no matter how the day had gone, no matter if they'd circled each other from dawn to dark like dogs deciding whether to fight, when it came time to turn in, Reuben would walk her to the door of his mother's room. She didn't need walking to it. It was 12 feet, but he did it. And he would turn his hat in his hands and duck his head and say, "Good night, ma'am." And she would say, "Good night, Mr. Cobb." Every night. Through the arguments, through the cold spells, through a whole week in September when they were so vexed with each other they'd hardly speak at the table. Still, every night, that small, ridiculous courtesy, the two of them standing at that door saying good night like strangers at a church social. I used to lie in my bunk off the kitchen and hear it through the wall, and it got so I couldn't sleep until I had, the way you can't settle till you've heard the clock strike. It was the only soft thing that passed between them in daylight, that good night. It was the place they laid down their weapons, just for a second, just long enough to wish each other through to morning. I don't think either one of them knew they were doing it. That's what I keep coming back to. A thing can grow in the dark for a long time before the people it's happening to look down and notice it's wrapped clear around their ankles. But the thing that turned it, because there's always a thing, came in the third week of October, and it came in the shape of trouble, which is how these things mostly come. We had a hand that fall named Pelt, a drifter Reuben took on for the gather, a sour, watchful sort I never liked. One evening Reuben was off at the far quarter, and I was laid up in the bunk with a bad back, no good to anybody, and Pelt got into the cooking sherry and got it into his head that the new woman of the house, being citified and alone, might be persuaded to be friendly, and he came to the kitchen door at dusk with his hat off and his manner all wrong. I heard it start. I got up cursing my own spine and got halfway across the kitchen, no use, an old man hobbling, and by the time I made the door I had it all wrong in my head. I had Etta cowering. I was already grieving what I was going to find. What I found was Etta Boone with the big cast-iron skillet held in two hands like a soldier holds a rifle, backed up against the dry sink, white in the face but steady, and her voice coming out flat and cold and absolutely without a tremble. "Mr. Pelt, you are drunk and you are mistaken about me, and you are going to walk back out that door, because if you take one more step I am going to lay you out on this floor and explain it to Mr. Cobb when he gets home, and I would a great deal rather not waste a good skillet on your head." Pelt laughed at her. That was his mistake. He took the step. She did not waste the skillet. She used it. She caught him a ringing blow across the shoulder and side of the head that I felt in my own teeth from the doorway, and he went down into the woodbox with a crash that brought soot down the chimney, and she stood over him with the skillet up for another if he wanted it, breathing hard, every inch of her shaking now that the worst was past, and not 1 inch of her giving ground. "Etta," I said. She looked up at me. For 1 second I saw clear down into how scared she'd been. Then the chin came up and she said, in a voice she was holding together with both hands, "Amos, would you be so kind as to sit on this man until Mr. Cobb returns? I find I need to sit down myself, and I will not do it in front of him." So I sat on Pelt, old back and all, and she went and sat in the good chair by the cold hearth with her hands folded hard in her lap to stop them shaking, and she did not cry, and we waited for Reuben in the dark. He came in near full night, calling out easy the way he did, "Amos, that you left the lamp." And then he came through to the kitchen and saw it. Saw me sitting on a half-conscious man, saw the skillet on the floor, saw the soot, saw Etta in the chair with her face like a held breath. And I watched something go through Reuben Cobb that I had never seen go through him before, not at his father's grave, not anywhere. He went very still and very quiet, and it was the worst kind of quiet, and he said, in a voice with no heat in it at all, which was how you knew, "Did he touch you?" "No," Etta said, "I saw to that." Reuben looked at the skillet. He looked at the man in the wood box. He looked at her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white, and I saw him understand in about 1 second everything she was not saying, the whole cost of holding herself that steady. And he did not go to pelt. That is the thing I want set down. A lesser man, a man who only cared about his own pride and his own property, would have gone for pelt first, would have made the night about his own fury. Reuben crossed the kitchen and knelt down in front of Etta's chair, slow, so as not to crowd her, and he did not touch her. He just got down to where she was and he said, very low, "You're all right. You did everything right. You're all right now." And Etta Boone, who had not cried when they carried out her piano, who had not cried at the platform braced to be sent home, who had not cried through pelt or after, Etta put her face in her hands and came all to pieces, finally, safely, with a man kneeling in front of her who had not made it about himself. Reuben let her. He stayed down there on his knees on the cold floor and let her cry, and he didn't say a word, and when at last she got hold of herself and wiped her face with the heel of her hand, mortified, and said, "I am sorry, I am never like this," he said the truest thing I ever heard him say. He said, "I know you're not. That's how I know how bad it was." We put Pelt off the place that night, drunk as he was, walked him to the road at the end of a rifle and told him Lantern Bend was the nearest bed and he'd best be gone from the country by morning, which he was. And when the house was quiet again, Reuben walked Etta to the door of his mother's room same as every night, and he turned his hat in his hands and he could not find his voice for a minute. Then he said, "Rough, I'll be just there. In the front room. All night. You don't have to, I'll just be there is all, so you can sleep." Etta looked at him a long time in the lamplight. The sharpness was all gone out of her. There was just the woman under it, tired to the bone and seen, finally, clear through, and not minding it. "Good night, Reuben," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He noticed, I saw him notice. He stood a little straighter and he said, soft, "Good night, Etta," first time for him too. And he slept in the front room in a hard chair with a rifle across his knees that he never once needed, all that night and the next 3, until she told him she was past it, and he should go to his own bed before he ruined his back like Amos. But something had moved in those few feet of hallway. They had stopped being a rancher and the wrong wife. They had got to be Reuben and Etta. It is a short way to walk, 12 feet, and it had taken them a month and a drunk fool and a cast-iron skillet to do it, but they had walked it. But after that the fighting changed its nature. They still went at each other. They were neither one of them the type to go quiet, and I'd not have wanted them to. There's nothing duller than two people too polite to spar. But now there was something underneath it, a warmth, a game almost. She'd say his way of doing a thing was older than dirt and twice as stubborn. And he'd say her way was fancy and would get a person killed out here where fancy didn't keep. And they'd argue it round the table. And at the end of it, half the time they'd have landed on some third way that was better than either. Her smoothed down by his sense and his roughed up by her thinking. And they'd both look a little pleased and pretend they weren't. She learned the work. I want that set down too, because she did it her own way and her own way turned out to be a good way. She never did take to milking, and she said so to the end of her days. "I have a perfectly cordial relationship with that cow," she'd say, "and I see no reason to spoil it by sitting under her at 5 in the morning." And Reuben milked, and never minded, because she did 10 things he couldn't. She took his father's account books, which were a swamp, and inside a month she had them drained and diked and running clear, and she found him near $200 he'd been losing every year to a cattle buyer's crooked arithmetic. And Reuben looked at the figures she laid out and looked at her and said, dazed, "You did this in your head." And she said, "I did this for 11 years for a man who never once thanked me, so a single thank you from you will more than cover it." And he thanked her and meant it. And I believe that was the day he fell the rest of the way, over a column of corrected sums, though it'd be Christmas before he knew it. She made that house into a home so gradual you couldn't point to the day it happened. A curtain here, a jar of late flowers there, bread that stopped being a crime and got to be a thing the hands would ride in early for. She'd had beautiful things once and lost them all, and instead of grieving them she went and made beauty out of nothing, out of flour sacks and creek flowers and a good hand with a needle, and the quarter moon, which had been a clean, sad, silent place, got warm. I'd come in cold off the range of an evening, and there'd be lamplight in the windows and the smell of supper and her voice, and his voice going back and forth, sparring, easy, and I'd stand out in the dark a second before I went in just to have the look of it, a house with people in it, after so long with just the one sad man rattling round. And every night the good night, less awkward now, warmer, but still there, still that little ceremony at the door, the two of them too shy yet to say the bigger thing, so they said the small one, careful, like it was holding the place for the big one until they were brave enough. I'll tell you the night I knew it had turned all the way. It was past the middle of November and the first real snow was coming. You could smell it. Reuben had been out late doctoring a heifer and came in chilled through and tired, and Etta had kept supper hot, and after he'd eaten she made him sit by the fire and this is the thing, she took off his boots, knelt down and pulled his cold, wet boots off his feet without a word, the way you do for someone you'd loved 20 years, and set them by the fire to dry, and Reuben sat there with his jaw working and his eyes too bright, this proud, shy man, being tended and not a word said, and the only sound the fire and the wind starting up outside. I went on to bed. Some things a old man has no call to watch. But I heard the good night through the wall later, and it was different that night. There was a long quiet first, a longer quiet than the 12 feet of hallway could account for, and then Reuben's voice, low, rougher than usual, said, "Etta, I have to say a thing and I'm going to say it bad, so bear with me." And a pause. When I wrote that letter, plain, sturdy, sensible, I knew what I was asking for. I was asking for somebody who wouldn't ask much of me, who I wouldn't have to. He stopped. Started over. I asked for somebody small enough to fit in the empty spot, is what I did, and not change anything, and not cost me anything. And the agency sent me you instead, who is about as far from small as the Lord makes them, and you have changed every single thing in this house and cost me my whole peace of mind. And I have never, his voice went out, came back. I have never been so glad of anything in my life as I am that they got it wrong. There was a silence then I won't try to fill in, because I don't know what was in it, and a man shouldn't make up the most important quiet in two other people's lives. But after a while I heard Etta, and her voice was not steady, which from her meant everything. She said, "I came out here meaning to be useful and bearable and to ask for nothing, because I had learned that asking for things was how you lost them. I had decided I would never again let myself want a single thing I might not get to keep. A breath. You have undone all of that, Reuben Cobb, you and your terrible biscuits and your weeds you cut by the creek, and I am furious with you, because now I want to keep this, and wanting to keep things is how a person gets their heart broke, and I had got so safe not wanting anything." "I'm not going any place," Reuben said. "I have got 800 head and 400 acres, and they don't none of them move faster than I let them. I'm the least going any place man you ever met." She laughed, a wet, helpless laugh, and then it was quiet again, the good kind, and after a while I heard the door soft and Reuben's step in the hall, and I thought that was the end of it for the night. But it wasn't quite. He stopped outside her door. I heard him stop, and he said real low, almost to himself, "Good night, Etta." And from inside, through the woods, soft as anything, "Good night, Reuben." Same words, 2 months of the same 2 words, but you would have had to be a stone not to hear that they'd come to mean the whole world by then. They'd started out as the manners of strangers and got to be the truest sentence either one of them knew how to say. They were married in the spring, which I'll get to, But I have to tell the winter first, because the winter is where the thing got proven, and a love that don't get proven is just a notion. The snow that started that November night turned into the hardest winter the Cottonwood Flats had seen in a dozen years. It came down for 3 days without a stop and buried the fences, and then it froze and then it came down again, and the temperature dropped till the nails sang in the walls, and we were shut up in that house, the three of us, for the best part of 2 weeks with the world gone white and silent past the windows. A thing like that will tell you the truth about people. I have seen good marriages cracked by a hard winter, two people penned up together until every small habit becomes a torment. I waited, I'll confess, to see whether Reuben and Etta's sparring would curdle, shut up close like that with no range to stomp off to. It did the opposite. It was the making of them. Penned in, they had no choice but to be in each other's company morning to night, and instead of wearing thin, they wore in, the way leather does. She read to him in the evenings. She'd brought a few books, all she'd saved out of the wreck, and she read them out by the fire in a voice that he'd watch as much as listen to. This big shy man sitting still as a child being read a story he was too old for and didn't want to end. He taught her cards and she beat him soundly and crowed about it, and he didn't mind being beat, which for Reuben was its own kind of love letter. They cooked together in that close, warm kitchen, bumping into one another, her getting flour on his shirt and him pretending to be put out about it. The two of them laughing at things that weren't even funny, the way people do when they're happy and can't say it yet. And then, deep in that fortnight, the cold near killed us, and the killing cold is what married them in fact if not yet in law. What happened was the heifers. Reuben had a bunch of young stock in the near pasture, and in the worst of it they drifted before the wind the way cattle will and fetched up against the far fence and bunched there. And if they stood there in that wind they'd freeze before morning, the whole lot, a winter's worth of his future froze standing up against a fence. Reuben saw it from the window in the last gray light and started pulling on his coat, and any other woman the letter would have got him. The plain, sturdy, sensible one who'd not ask much. She'd have stood at the window and wrung her hands and watched her man ride off into a thing that kills and prayed. Not Etta. Etta took one look out the window and started pulling on his spare coat and his mother's old boots over 3 pairs of his socks, and Reuben said, "Etta, no, it's no work for." And she rounded on him and said, "If you finish that sentence with a woman, I will hit you with the skillet, and you have seen what I can do with the skillet." 2 of us can turn that herd in half the time, and half the time is the difference between you keeping your stock and me keeping you, so you will stop being gallant and you will hand me the lantern. And Reuben, and this is how I knew he had got, at last, all the way wise, Reuben handed her the lantern. I couldn't go. My back wouldn't let me ride in that, and the both of them knew it, and Reuben said, "Amos, keep the fire and keep the coffee," which was a kindness, giving an old man a job so he didn't have to feel useless watching them go out into the dark to maybe die. They went out into it with 1 lantern and 2 horses and a length of rope between their saddles, so they couldn't lose each other in the white, and the door shut, and I was alone in the warm house with the coffee and the dark coming down and the worst hour of my life. I won't stretch it out. It was near 4 hours. The wind screamed the whole time and I couldn't see a thing past the glass, and I prayed more in those 4 hours than I have in the 40 years since, and I am not a praying man. And then, when I had got to where I couldn't hardly stand to watch the window any more, there came a banging at the door and they fell in out of the storm, the both of them, white over with snow and frozen near to statues and so cold they couldn't talk, but alive and grinning like idiots through cracked frozen lips, because they had done it. They'd got the whole bunch turned and hazed into the lee of the barn, and saved every head, the 2 of them in the dark, in that wind, working it out between them with hand signals and the rope and 12 weeks of having learned exactly how the other one's mind ran. I got them in by the fire and got hot coffee and hotter broth into them and got the snow off and the feeling back into their hands, and they sat there shaking and laughing and not able to speak yet, and Etta got her voice first, and what she said, still shaking, hands wrapped round the cup, snow melting in her hair. What she said was, "Reuben, I have never in my life done anything that mattered as much as that. I kept your stock. We kept your stock." And Reuben looked at her, and he was past being shy by then. The cold had froze the shy right out of him, and he said, "Our stock," and reached over and took her cold hand in his cold hand and held it, right there in front of me. The first time I ever saw him touch her on purpose in daylight, and neither one of them let go for a long time. That was the night. I have always believed that they were married, whatever the calendar and the preacher said later. A wedding is a fine thing, and I'll tell about theirs. But the marrying, the real marrying, where two people find out for certain that the other one will go out into the killing dark beside them and not behind them, that happened in a blizzard over a bunch of half-froze heifers, and I was the only witness, and I have kept it like treasure ever since. That night when they'd thawed and eaten and could move again, Reuben walked her to her door same as always. By then it was the foolishest thing in the world, that good night. Two people who just held each other's lives in their hands for 4 hours in a blizzard, saying good night at a door 12 feet from the fire like callers. But he did it. He turned his hat in his hands. He wasn't even wearing a hat. He turned the empty air where his hat would be from habit and caught himself and laughed. And he said, "Good night, Etta." And she did not say it back. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, and she said, "Reuben, I am tired of saying good night to you through a door." And she held out her hand. I went to bed. There are some good nights an old man's got no business hearing the end of. They were married in May, when the cottonwood flats came up green, and the creek ran loud with the snowmelt, and the same asters that had got crushed on the platform in October bloomed again all up and down the bank, so that Reuben could cut her a proper armful this time, not a sad fistful of weeds in the cold, but a whole spring's worth. And she carried them down the aisle of the little church in Lantern Bend, and she did not hold them like a thing she had not decided about. She held them like they were hers. Half the county came, because by spring the story had got around, the way stories will. The rancher who'd ordered plain and sturdy and got the sharp-tongued widow who'd brained a man with a skillet and turned a herd in a blizzard, and how the whole country had watched all winter to see what it take, and it had took. They came to see it. And they were not disappointed, because at the part where the preacher asked Reuben Cobb would he have this woman, Reuben, who could not say a tender thing to save his life, who had courted her for 7 months in arguments and account books and boots dried by the fire. Reuben looked at Etta and got that look he got, the red ears, the working jaw, and then he said, clear enough for the back pew, "I asked for plain and sturdy, and the Lord sent me the wrong woman entirely. And it is the best mistake was ever made on my account. And yes, I will have her, and I'll be lucky every day she'll have me." And the church laughed and cried both at once, which is the only proper thing to do at a good wedding, and Etta laughed and cried too, and said her own yes in a voice that, for once in her life, did not have 1 ounce of sharp in it. They had years. I'll not lay them all out. A man's good years are mostly the same good year over and over, which is the whole blessing of them. They had 4 children, 3 of them as sharp-tongued as their mother and 1 as shy as their father. And the quarter moon prospered, partly because Etta never did let another cattle buyer's crooked arithmetic past her. And the house that had been so silent the year Reuben wrote that letter got so loud and so full that I used to threaten to move my bunk clear out to the barn for some peace, which was a lie, because I'd not have moved 1 foot from the noise of that family for all the quiet in the world. And every night, every single night through 41 years, through the children and the good crops and the bad ones, through the gray that came into her hair and the stoop that came into his back, every night Reuben Cobb walked his wife to their door, even after it was the same door, even when it was just the 2 of them crossing a room they'd crossed 10,000 times, and he ducked his head, this old man now, and he said it. "Good night, Etta." And she said it back. "Good night, Reuben." The very last time I heard it was the winter she took sick, the bad winter, her last one, and Reuben sat by her bed every night of it the way he'd sat by it that first scared week with a rifle across his knees, except now he held her hand instead. And the last night when she was very low and we all knew it, I was in the next room and I heard him, soft, the way he'd said it 10,000 times, "Good night, Etta." And I heard her faint, but I heard it, the same 2 words she'd answered him with since the second week of October 41 years gone. "Good night, Reuben." She went in the night, easy, holding his hand. And Reuben Cobb, who had once stood on a platform too shy to know what to do with a fistful of flowers, sat with her till morning and didn't say a word, because they had already said the only word that mattered, the same one they'd been saying all along, all those years, the little one that was holding the place for the big one, except by the end it wasn't holding the place anymore. By the end it was the big one. By the end, good night was the whole of it. I am an old man now, older than Reuben got to be, and I have outlived the both of them and most everybody else in this account, and there is not much left of that time but me to tell it. But I'll tell you the truth of it plain, the way Reuben would have wanted, who never could abide a fancy word. He went off to a stranger's letter looking for somebody small enough to fit the empty place and ask nothing of him, and the world in its mercy sent him exactly the wrong woman, the largest, sharpest, bravest, dearest soul that ever got down off a midnight train, and she filled that empty place so full it never was empty again, not for one night, not for 41 years. He asked for plain and sturdy. He got the love of his life. And every evening of it, to the very last, he walked her to the door and turned his hat in his hands and said good night, like it was the first time, like he still couldn't believe his luck. He couldn't, I don't think. Neither could I. Some mistakes are the making of a man. That one was the making of 2, and a home, and a house full of children, and a story an old hand keeps by the fire to remember them by. Good night, the both of you. Wherever you got to, I expect you got there together, and I expect one of you walked the other to the door.